Today's guest is Professor Jarrod Haar. Jarrod is Dean's Chair and Professor of Management and Marie Business at Massey University. He researches employees and organisations, especially wellbeing, and often on Indigenous peoples, Maori. He has won industry and best practice awards and multiple research grants, $7.7 million individually. He is a fellow of the Royal Society of New Zealand Te Aparangi.
Nice.
He has 178 journal articles and given 145 keynotes or invited presentations. He's a frequent media commentator, including 110 television appearances, and has been ranked in the Elsevier top 2% of scientists worldwide, business and management subfield since 2021. Welcome, Jarrod. And first of all, did I pronounce everything correctly?
Yeah, really well on the Tiaparangi too. So well done
Oh,
you.
thank you very much. Thanks for coming on. I'd love to start by just opening it up to you and finding out a little bit more about you and where you're from, what's your background and anything you want to share.
So I started. So I'm born and raised on a little beachfront town on Mount Maunganui on the east coast of New Zealand. I went to university, finished my bachelor's degree, came back to work. While working, realized I was not as the best student I could be. I was really into my sport. So I spent more time doing my sport than university stuff. So after a couple of years, I came back to study. And then while doing my master's, I had an American supervisor, I guess teacher who became my supervisor. And every time we'd do these really cool studies, and I'd always say to him, "Excuse me, sir, well, this is set in America. What's it like in New Zealand?" And every time he was from Georgia, he'd go, "Well, I don't know." And I'd always be like, "Gosh, damn it." Because we're quite a small country and, there's only seven business schools in the whole country out of eight unis. And then after a while, I ended up being his research assistant. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do a PhD so I can get some New Zealand data, really, because I was just kind of fascinated with what the evidence was and what was missing from New Zealand. As you can imagine, there was some in New Zealand, perhaps not a lot in my area, and Maori employees or Maori business stuff was rare as hen's teeth.
Mm.
Um, and so my career began, and it has been going full black ever since. So that's really my thing. I like to say I'm a storyteller, and I guess I've got a real big bent on. I've done some international studies, published something recently with New Zealand, Australia, and America, for example, but predominantly a big focus on New Zealand and a big focus on Māori as well. So. And it's still keeping me out of trouble and keeping me interested 20 years later. So I can't
Right.
complain.
That's fantastic. And so what when you kind of trace it back, what did you most want to contribute to when you first started?
In all honesty, I think I just wanted to contribute some New Zealand stories. So I did
Yeah.
my PhD on work and family, which was convenient because, ooh, when did I get that published? 10 years after my PhD, I did my first work-life balance article. I've been knocking it around for a few years too. Sometimes these things just take a long time to gestate. And since then, I've published lots on work-life balance. It'd be kind of one of my core areas today. And in particular, things like I've done work on racism in the workplace in New Zealand for Māori and Pacifica in that case, but I've also done cultural labour, the double cultural shift that Maori workers face and things like that. So I've done some, I really started off kind of on a traditional track to get myself sorted before dipping my toes into the kind of Indigenous world. Because I can't say I had any guides in that area, so I had to kind of test the water on my own, and then kind of once I felt confident, I knew what I was doing. Try not to make too many mistakes, try not to insult too many people, and I think I've been relatively successful at that. You can't always make everybody happy, um, but yeah, no, it's been a fun journey so far, and I guess my big thing at the moment is around AI and trying to understand um, where we're going, what we're doing. Does it do much benefit or something like that? So those are the other things I've got working on now. Is there a dark side to AI use around burnout, for example? Maybe we can touch on that one.
Mm.
So yeah, the world keeps, and obviously the whole COVID thing was, yeah, was terrible. And I think in New Zealand, and I'm sure it's not a lot different in Australia, there is this whole, I think we're quite scarred as a country and maybe as a world, from COVID. I think, sure, have we bounced back? Sure, relatively, largely, but not perfectly. And we see this more and more with younger workers, for example, those who have started studying and it all went online and maybe it finished online like 2 years later, which seems a bit crazy, but that's just kind of the way things rolled around COVID. So, yeah, well, I am gonna suggest we might get back equilibrium, but I don't think we're there yet, even though it's like 5 years later and counting. So that's a kind of interesting intellectual exercise that I'm interested in, and I'm doing stuff on burnout, which we can talk about, where I do have lots of evidence to suggest that we have not bounced back totally yet.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, there's so much to unpack there. I feel like, first of all, I wanted to sort of mention you were talking about as you were going through your first initial studies when you sort of said there was no one really ahead of you doing this kind of work. And I sort of see you really as a trailblazer really in the work that you're doing, particularly in the Maori space. Would you say that that's about
Yeah,
right?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I can't say I thought of myself in any grandiose terms, but I have to say I'm really positive and encouraging of other Māori academics.
Mm,
And we have a few, and I have to be honest and say we are publishing more and more, and we're getting more good stuff out there. So I do think
right.
that's a great place to be as an Indigenous scholar to see. Oh, yes, there are. Instead of saying, "Hey, we don't know anything about," or we only understood very little. Now we're getting more and more, and then we get genuine pockets of, "Hey, we don't know anything about this." Okay, that gives us something to research on rather than, I could research anything when I started, and it would be a gap because we didn't
All
have that much
gaps.
evidence. Yeah.
Yeah, oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. And so let's go a little bit into some of the research that you've been doing, particularly maybe to start with around the burnout. And you were mentioning, I know, as you mentioned here in Australia, it's the same. We saw even prior, really, to the pandemic, there was this sort of increase in stress coming in through the populations, and then, of course, around the world, we had this giant leap of stress and anxiety. But again, and I know that this was predicted during the pandemic that we wouldn't go back to baseline. And we're seeing that. And then, of course, we're layering in AI on top of that. So what are you seeing in your research around that?
Yeah, so I collected some data, believe it or not, February of
Mm,
2020 on job burnout, and
wow.
it was only on managers, and I was like, oh wow, that rate seems to be quite high, the severe levels. And then I was collecting it when I think I was just about to start, and lockdown started, and I was like,
Mm,
no, we can't start now because everything was kind of paralyzed. And then about 2 months into it, so the first data of the workforce I collected was in May 2020, and I've had 16 waves of data, basically about 1,000 employees each one. And for me, the burnout levels. I use this burnout assessment tool, which has a burnt out risk, which is the severe level. So you could actually get a workforce rate And so, like, in May 2020, the workforce was 17%, and by the end of the year, it was up to 27%. And I was just like, oh gosh, this is looking kind of bad. And then it was 30% in 2021, and I was like, supposed to be going down, not up. And then
Mm.
it peaked at 43% in November 21. And I
Wow.
have to be honest, I was just like, hey, caramba, this is kind of crazy. And I remember talking to a GP friend, and I said, like, man, the workforce data kind of suggests, 1 and 2.5 are severely burnt out. And he just said to me, oh, I totally believe it. And I was like, really? And he goes, oh yeah, everybody coming in my practice is totally exhausted, totally stressed out. And I was like, far out. Okay, it was nice to have a bit of validation. So I've been tracking that for the 2022 November 2025. We are down, but it's like 20%. I'm like, okay, is this going to be just another? We've had a few times where it's bounced around, like, 24, 23, 22, 25. Then it went up high again, 26% in February 25, and then down to 20% in November. So I'm kind of fascinated from a data scientist perspective. Oh, what will the next? I think it'll be April 2026. Will that be about 20%? Will it be lower, which would be amazing? But my job is to report on the data, not
No.
it'll be whatever it is. But I'm kind of hoping uh, it's lower or stable. If it's back up to like 25%, and obviously now we've got these, the financial stress. We've got, petrol prices are going through the roof in both New Zealand and Australia. I kind of feel like, and I saw somebody in the local newspaper saying, "Oh, it feels like, March 2020 all over again." And I was like, I think that's a slight exaggeration, but I was thinking like, yeah, but if that's what people are thinking, well, it could be another kind of, not a catastrophe, but it could be another challenging year when, especially on the well-being of the workforce. That's what I'm really trying to capture here. Um, and consistently over that time, it doesn't matter your gender, it doesn't matter where you work. Um, Burnout finds everybody. That would be my first takeaway from like data from 16,000 Kiwi workers. I'm sorry, my Australian cousins, there's no reason to believe Australia has it any different. It might be, and it might be a little bit lower, but it might not. I saw one of the petrol prices from the Outback. Was it last week? And I was just like, it was even more expensive than um, in New Zealand, and I was just like, oh yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah.
we like our economy is still trying to kick it off. I guess I'd say, it's been very slow here. Um, we've started to get, inflation under control, and then this petrol crisis starts, and to be honest, I kind of feel like we're jumping back into it again. So it will be interesting to see. But overall, yeah, it's at 20%. I'm expecting single digits at least, and I mean with 8% as a potential high and 5% as a more realistic level to be at. And so when we're at 20%, I'm just like, oh wow, are we still as a workforce still way off the pace of where I think we could be?
Mm. And when you're so just going back to those the last year or two, are you saying we're on a very gradual downward trend, but it's
Yes,
it's extremely
yeah.
gradual, and it's unclear whether it's going to go up again or down again,
Yeah,
basically.
and that's what the data shows, and it's literally the slightest of,
Mm,
the trend line is down, but it's nothing to, it's nothing like this, right? It's
yeah,
very
yeah.
shallow, and I suspect, or I fear that come April, maybe it pops up again, and then we may that it may reduce that downward curve even more. So,
Mm.
um,
And
So
what,
there's a tough
sorry,
job out there for those in, those trying to build the well-being of their workforce, right? Especially organizations and things like burnout. I think they often tend to say, oh, yes, but, that worker's a workaholic. That's why they're burnt out, rather than, yes, we give them too much work to do. Damn, sorry.
yeah, yeah. And so you've got this, and it's really interesting right now, as you mentioned, AI, which is supposedly going to make life easier, but then there's a whole lot of stress that's sitting underneath all of that, the adaptation or the adoption of the AI tech. And then, of course, what can happen to the workforce when AI is adopted and redundancies and all of that
Yes.
type of thing. And so there's this underlying kind of stress, and then you're piling on, yes, geopolitical issues, cost of living issues. So I always find it interesting, like how do you tease all this out? How do you separate it and say, well, this is, we can definitively say that this is the cause of this person's burnout when there's so many multiple factors. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, from a researcher's perspective, the key here is to actually have to collect multiple factors so you can actually tease out which ones do the most damage. So I've written a paper which is still out in the world of reviews over 8 periods. And the reason I did 8 periods, it was kind of like in 22 onwards, because in 21 we had a lockdown in Auckland. Only one city, but the biggest city. And I was kind of like, it's a bit dangerous to put that kind of figures in. Looking at workload versus loneliness, for example. Now, there is recently more attention given to workplace loneliness, which is about um, you could be in an open plan office with 100 workers and feel lonely because I don't have anybody I can turn to. There's nobody I can discuss things with. So it's not that, hey, hi, those are real shallow things, but it's actually having someone, I guess, kind of a deeper connection with people. And those numbers have got kind of crazy too, really high levels of loneliness. They do fluctuate a bit. But they still are kind of, what's the last one? 17% of the workforce reporting high levels of loneliness. But in my 8 waves of data, I found twice that they're similar. There's no real difference between workload and loneliness. But on the other 6 waves of data, loneliness outdid workload 5 out of 6 times. So the most damaging thing wasn't just that, oh my gosh, I got too much work. It never seems to stop. But what happens is I've got too much work. I can't stop. Also translates to I've got too much work. I have no time to have coffee with Ruth. I'm just going to stay at my desk and keep tapping along. And when I get home, hey kids, I got mum here. Mum's put dinner on the table. Now I got no time for the kids. I got to get back on my device and do more work. And so it's this perpetuating thing. And so burnout, the biggest predictor across these few years was actually loneliness, not workload. Although I did find workload, if you've got more work to do, it kind of facilitates or encourages loneliness. And I just think it's about, you don't have the time. So, you say to me, oh, let's go have lunch. Let's have a lazy lunch. And I'm like, oh no, just got too much work to do. I'm just going to have mine at the desk. Maybe one of the takeaways there would be working on making those positive connections at work. Remember, they don't have to be your best friend. But, and in all fairness, probably don't even need to be your friend. But we are social animals, right? It is about tummy, but what did you get up to? How's things going? Let's not talk shop. Let's talk life. What do No, we don't need to talk about petrol because there's nothing to talk about, right? So just spending some enriching time eating rather than, spilling crumbs on your keyboard as you work through your lunchtime. And so that's been an interesting thing. More recently, that AI's come along. I've been tracking AI use in the New Zealand workforce, and I'll be honest, we are nowhere near at the amazing levels the hype would tell us, right? We've kind of gone 25%, 30%, 35%, 25%. And I was like, oh, interesting. We actually kind of dip back down again. Consistently, those using it say, yeah, it aids my creativity, it aids my productivity. And that makes me go, yay. But then it also aids my burnout. And I was like, no, oh, sorry, doesn't aid it, enhances my burnout risk. And I was like, no, how comes that? So after my first study, and now I have a few different waves of data finding the same thing. It's that cognitive load, right? The cognitive demands. And I think about, I use the statistics program for 20 years. It has gone from version 6 in my PhD to version 30. So that sounds massive, right? 95% of what I use is pretty much identical to what it used to be. Maybe it's changed under a different tab, but everything's pretty much the same. I have not had to do any intensive training or anything like that. But I think of ChatGPT 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4, and before you know it, people are upgrading. And I think the AI stuff, because it's a race, because it is a race from, I guess, the producers of AI. Use our one, right? It's got to be better than, A has to be better than B. So it's all about upgrading, but we as workers have to do the upgrading. And I think and the evidence would suggest in New Zealand that even though it's only a small chunk using it a lot, they are suffering higher burnout because they've got to work way more cognitively than probably they were ever expecting, right? And when you see the way AI is promoted, it does tend to be, oh, this will make things so much easier. And it's like, really great. How? Oh, well, you have to put these I can't make any sense out of this program.
Mhm.
You need to, you need to train more on it. And a good example of that would be in academia where I can say, write me a lit review on work-life balance. And then I've done this as a test. I've read it and gone, that's pretty uninspiring. And other times you can be like, yeah, but those, references don't exist. And people like to use the word, oh, it's hallucinating. Well, you know, if I told the bank I had deposited $100 and I hadn't, I don't think hallucination is the word they would use, right? They'd say, no, you're
I
lying.
love that.
That's theft.
Yeah.
And so for academics, I've found, I know somebody who used AI lots and lots and lots, but produced nothing extra because I think, at least in our profession, you've got to spend so much time checking everything. If you're highly skilled, AI may not be useful in that approach. Although I have another colleague who's used it to, says like, read all the articles in this journal, now review my paper using those articles and I'm like, oh wow, that sounds really interesting. So I still think we're sussing things out.
Mm.
I think the trouble for the workforce is every time there's a new Claude ChatGPT that is a major upgrade, then the workers have to rework harder and harder. Do we have once a month upgrade your AI skill day in the workplace? No, we just magically think workers will pick things up. And this is why I think we have better creativity and performance on one hand and higher burnout on the other hand. So I think of AI, at least at the moment, from my New Zealand data, a double-edged sword. Benefits, sure, but dangerous benefits because it may be that extra productivity and innovation comes at a personal cost. And I know what happens when workers burn out. Organizations say, oh dear, that's terrible. Well, you haven't got enough days leave, but we'll hold your job for 3 months or something. That's so kind of you. Thank you very much. So, we might get onto this a bit later, but I do think one of the things there is the self-care, or at least, people being aware that, okay, if you're doing these things and it's actually, draining you, not enhancing you, those are warning signs, right? And don't expect the organization or your employer to come in and say, gee whiz, Jarrod, you're looking a bit tired. I think you're doing too much on that AI. They'll just, if you're performing, especially if you're performing well, crack the whip, get some more work out of you. And when you fall over, probably sigh and go, gee whiz, that's unfortunate. But in this labour market, for where Australia, for example, wow, we've got lots of Kiwis coming here every day. There's a plane load, so we can find somebody to do your job. And maybe the reminder there is, not only does looking after what I'm doing aid my well-being, but it also aids my job and career, right? And financial stability and things like that. So I do think, especially those heavy AI users who do feel drained, they should be taking a second look and going, okay, I've got to temper this more.
Mm. Yeah, well, I mean, when you were talking a little bit earlier about that correlation or the chicken and egg kind of scenario with the loneliness and the burnout and the contribution of loneliness to burnout, it made me think of, something that I talk a lot about, which is buffering those, buffering the stress or buffering the burnout, or however you want to phrase it. But some of the factors that can really contribute to you being able to deal with those things, like having already built up social connection, whether you decide to do it individually or whether your organization encourages it and says, hey, let's actually create this program where we do sit down every Friday and have these non-work conversations. You know, Apart from social connection, what other things have come up in your research that you see as being buffers for this kind of disconnection?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, and Australia is leading the way here, this disconnecting from the workplace. I'm doing some research here on corporates in the last couple of months. And, one of those critical issues here is just the amount of people working after hours, using technology to facilitate work. In family time was the specific one, and they were both detrimental to burnout. So really, it is about, and again, sometimes I think we can get caught in the, oh, I love what I'm doing. True, that there's nothing wrong with loving what you're doing, and and having purpose and meaningful work or a calling. Those are all lovely things, but it can kind of it's like speed us up into the nosedives as we're going down, getting closer and closer to crashing into the earth. It may encourage us to be fixated on just keeping on, in this case, diving down with my work until we crash and burn. And then we'll all go, oh, what was I thinking? So I do think, trying to master your own, be aware of yourself. That's kind of one of the things I like to tell people. Tomet neske, which is the Greek one, know thyself. I do this myself. Early in my career, I'd spend, a whole 8 hours writing one paragraph that was rubbish the next morning when I read it. And I realized that sometimes you can flog the horse, and it ain't going anywhere. And so one of the things I personally do, and I'm happy to admit this, when I'm not when I feel totally empty, I do not try to work. And and I say to people, hey, I've probably overworked it Monday to Thursday and done well over my required hours anyway. So I've got no problem with saying, actually, Friday is a really slow day of doing, very little work, maybe making some social connections with people, because in a Monday to Friday office, there's always emails coming in and stuff, and just being quite easy on myself and going, I know I can't get much done, and in all honesty, I know I can't get hardly anything done if I'm trying to do some quality work. So it's just a waste of effort, because not only do you put all the time and effort in, you get rubbish out. But if you can spend that time recharging, it's almost like, I go and plug myself in, right? It's like recharging your phone. And maybe that's, for some reason, we've lived with these things for quite a decent time now. we got to remember that while we are not a mobile device, we are very similar in that we have lots of energy, do lots of work, and sometimes the heavy work drains. But when we're really low, when the battery light is, connect to charger is flashing, we should listen to our body, our mind, our other people in our lives who go, "Are you okay? You look really tired." Oh, where the hell am I? Oh, you're at work. Gosh, when did I get here? Those are useful things to react to. And I think we can sometimes forget self-care will keep us focused on doing meaningful work. It will help us make connections. It will at least limit or reduce our chances of burnout. And I think, it'll actually help you get through your workload, right? Because, otherwise I'd say to you, what did you do all day? I worked on that report. Oh, that's great. What did you do? Nothing. I actually achieved nothing, and if you were my boss, Ruth, you'd be like, oh, that's total rubbish, wasn't it? Whereas if I said to you, oh yeah, I've just been tidying up some things, I'm just struggling on a few sections. As long as I deliver, how I get there shouldn't bother a good manager, and maybe there's a good takeaway for business leaders and managers and owners, right? Is the job getting done? Yes. If I have to do it in different ways, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting I go and sleep and go into work and sleep in the chair, because that's gonna put a funny vibe on those who do work differently. But we should realize that workers do things differently. We're all individuals. And if somebody has a history of delivering, the best way to stop them delivering their performance is to burn them out, because then they won't hit their targets. They won't keep clients and end users happy, right? They will stuff things up, and then we're all in the stook. So, encouraging people to self-care, be aware of themselves. If you are at 100% battery and you're just cruising, then that's your choice. But that's probably a waste of a lot of good energy. But when you're at that 15% mark, it's a reminder that, well, actually, it might, you might have a chill day, get through some low-level tasks, and then come the next Monday, you're like, oh, I'm back at 75% or something like that, right? Rather than, oh no, I pushed through the Friday and the Saturday and the Sunday, and Monday bowls around and you're at 8%, and you're just like, and your boss is like, wow, this report really craters at the end. What happened? Sorry, I've been really, and then we make excuses, right? Oh, I've been really distracted. No, you haven't. You've been exhausted. And maybe that's a reminder too, with that self-care, to be, sometimes say to your boss, man, you just keep giving me too much work to do. I've done a study on New Zealand a few times here where I asked people, is it common in your organization to reward productive people with more work? And about half the workforce says, yeah, that's totally what goes on in my organization, because that's what I see. And I do kind of think it makes sense, right? If you're the boss, I'll give it to Ruth. Yeah. She always delivers. Now, Ruth will always deliver until we've overloaded her and now she's burnt out. And then guess what happens? Oh, the client's not happy, and then we're like, gosh, I wish I'd done that differently. So, a good manager should be feeling, and I say to people, business owners and leaders, I say, if your team has achieved the work to do that they're supposed to do, let's say, okay, it's the 25th of March and we've finished all the work for the month. Why are you giving me more work to do? You should be saying, hey, I'm sure there's a few simple things you want to work on for the last week. Hey, have you got any training and development you can do online? I want you guys to do that. Oh, what about no, we're starting the next report. Won't be on the 1st of April because April Fools, right? But, we can start that one on the next day. Let's not rush into things to give your workforce a chance to recover. And I don't think leaders or organizations do a great job on that. I realize some will. Great. Keep it up. Others who aren't, take the cue from those leaders who are. And maybe if you're a good leader who does that, remind those who think cracking the whip is the way forward, because I think the data shows us that if you're doing this kind of activity non-stop, it will lead to burnout, for example. So it's not going to help your workforce or or your team's productivity long term.
And I think it's important to also remember that prior to full burnout, you're going to have disengagement and you're going to have resentment. So if you are, piling up that work because you've got that high performer who keeps on saying yes, they might be saying yes, but internally they're becoming more and more resentful. And I think if they're a high performer, they generally will continue to try to perform at their best. But over time, probably, I imagine you'll see a diminishment in that, not just the output, but the quality probably, as well as just the level of engagement in
And I have a
daily
New
work.
Zealand partner that says that turnover rate's much higher for those who are burnt out because they are rightfully saying, "Oh, this job, it no longer thrills me,
Mm.
and it's easier to quit rather than go to my boss and say, Ruth, you've overloaded me. I'm exhausted. I don't really have my head or heart in the job as of right now." And typically people say, "Oh, that's terrible. See you later," rather than saying, "Gosh, this guy's a long-term performer. What have I done wrong? I think I just kept giving him more and more work." So good reminders, I think, for self-care, but also leadership to look at workload.
Mm.
And I'm not saying, "Hey, take the last week of March off and have a holiday." Managers would go, "Oh, I can't do that," right? But you can say, "Oh, I want you to do a couple of days training and development." I don't know about what it's like in Australia. In New Zealand, organizations love to say, "Yes, go onto YouTube and do any training, as long as it's free, we totally support it." Now, what typically happens is people go, "Oh, that's going to take me 1 hour, 4 hours, 8 hours. I got no time at work for that." So maybe it's a reminder that, hey, think of that AI skills. Hey, next week when we have no pressing work, let's do some AI brainstorming amongst each other, share our tips and challenges, because then we're going to upgrade everybody and then maybe say, okay, the next day, let's have a self-training day on your own, working on AI in work time only. When you
Mm.
go home, leave it off, and then we'll come back and we'll do another session the next day. Those might be good ways to build skills, teams, connections, reduce that loneliness rather than just, crank the accelerator forward and say, "Okay, you finished the March project early. Here's your reward. We're starting April early." And your boss is mentally priming up the May job, right? To go, "Cool, I'll have the next one another week early." That's just going to burn people out and not get great results. So I think we can use all of those things to kind of facilitate performance, enhance well-being, and maybe get some training and development in.
Mm.
A lot of people in New Zealand, and I don't know, I doubt it's much different in Australia, talk about their organizations are quite supportive of training and development opportunities. But I do wonder sometimes how much time we get to actually bring it to life. And it may be that's the missing factor there. And here might be a way, even if you think, okay, we're going to finish our report on time, but maybe after it's finished, let's have a couple of days to decompress.
Yeah.
And while it's training and development, it's also recharging batteries, and then they might be ready for the next project.
Yeah. And the other thing I was thinking about was, um, autonomy and flexibility in the workplace, and the role with that, the connection between that and reducing the potential for burnout. And I know that this came up a lot over COVID. Obviously, we had the not just the ability, but the mandated or it was mandatory for us to stay home. So that was when obviously the conversation opened up around, well, do I actually have to go into an office? And I mean, I know that there's the pros and the cons. Obviously, we have a lot of encouragement for people to go back, have that connection, be in the workplace, bounce ideas off each other and all that. And then I'm wondering, what about right now when there's this extra stress on people around petrol prices?
Yeah.
Could it be a simple, maybe not a permanent fix, but just a simple like, hey, guys, I know there's a lot of stress on everyone right now. If anyone feels like, just saving a bit of petrol money would help you and you can do your work from home, do you think those sorts of little tokens make any difference in the workplace for people? And what are your thoughts around that? It's just,
Yeah, I think that's a great example, and it's a good way for an organization to show that they care, right? And
yeah.
here we might broadly say, oh, they care about my well-being, but it also includes my financial well-being. And I sure as, maybe hump day, Wednesdays is a work from home day for everybody. Let's save some petrol or commuting time.
Mm.
I
Obviously,
think it's really
definitely.
an important way that organizations can show they care, at least, because it won't necessarily cost them anything. The one thing, though, I have had people tell me I work hybrid a couple of days a week. I come into the office and I spend all day on Zoom meetings, and
Yep.
I sit there thinking, what the heck did I come in?
Yep.
Why did I get up early, shower, shave, dress, public transport to get in here to do something I could have just bowled into my bedroom, my office door and done it online anyway. And so I think there's a useful reminder for organizations and leaders to say, let's make sure we're not talking about the theater of being seen. And because the interesting thing is a lot of research tells us that people say, oh, we need to get together and brainstorm. It's actually not exactly the way it goes. So you and I are in the office together, you say something, and I'm like, oh, okay. And then the next day, when I could be back in the office, I could be working from home, and I'm like, there was that thing that Ruth said, and I looked something up, and because I've had time to kind of sit on it and gestate it and things like that. But everybody seems to think, or leaders like to think, I put everybody in a room. I gave them a scone and they hashed out an amazing plan and it was amazing and it took us 2 hours and you could only do it in the office. And I think that's well and truly it can happen, but it's more debunked in that there is way more complexity behind
Absolutely.
creativity. And a lot of it is just time, and it's not necessarily time together, right? So I can work from home and still come up with great ideas and come back and say, hey, Ruth, I was thinking about what you said. And you could say, I'm going to think about that. I'll get back to you in 2 days' time because I'm off home tomorrow. Okay. Things like that. So again, I think we've got to be careful we don't fall into the stereotype that everybody must be in the office.
Mm.
Um, you know, everybody must be doing things together. And if that is the motto, then we should be canning Zoom and Teams meetings, right? We should be saying, oh no, if we're all here, we don't need this. But we know what happens now. Oh, I got a client. I was talking to a lawyer, and they said, oh, I'd travel every week pre-COVID, and I'd go to Australia at least like 6 to 8 times a year. And now it's like all of those New Zealand ones, they might go twice a year because they want to they do want the company wants to see them in person. Most of them are quite happy to have them virtually, and the Australian things is down to 1 to 2 trips as well. And I was just like, oh, okay, and we're talking high level experts, high level customers. Everybody wants efficiencies, right? And the fact that I don't have to fly you down, put you up in a hotel, and we can get into a Zoom meeting ideally and start doing stuff straight away. So again, maybe looking at those processes and the way we do things. I think like sick leave is, I don't know what it's like in Australia. We have lots of presenteeism in New Zealand where
Yes.
people are sick and come to work coughing and spluttering. I mean, and it's going to get more frequent and more important as we get closer to, May, June,
Yes.
July, for example.
Mm.
Um, at one stage there, due to COVID, I think we'd got into a real sweet spot where people were like, "Oh, I'm sick. I'm going to stay home." Lovely, great. But I do think that's kind of one of those things that's rebounded, and not in a good way, because I thought, "Oh, we should be taking sick leave," and a lot of high performers feel that pressure, right? Well, I'm home sick, but my boss has emailed me 4 times between 8:30 and 10 a.m. and I'm going to have to answer some of them. Well,
Mm.
and I like to remind people sick days were when you were sick and you would hop into bed and recover, right? You're trying to fight the infection, you're trying to have a lemon drink or whatever your way to repair is. And it isn't, "Oh, I'll just do half-pace work,"
Right.
because then that's actually working, right? That's not a sick. And again, imagine if your boss says, "Oh, we won't count this as a sick day. It's a work day." Great, but I'm still sick. But don't worry, you've got Saturday and Sunday to recover on your days off. I'm not sure I'm
Mm.
winning here.
Mm.
So again, another thing for leaders to maybe say, "Ruth, you look terrible," and you go, "Oh, I've been, I'm sick. I've got sick from my kids. Hey, look, we have nothing pressing the rest of the week. How about a couple of sick days?" Really? Oh, that would just be, because often it's a chance to then decompress and wind down and probably slip slightly deeper into sickness, but then maybe bounce back a little bit quicker because you don't have the text messages or the WhatsApps
Absolutely.
or the emails,
Yeah.
you know, and the client going, "Oh, I know you're sick, but, oh, what do you mean, but?"
Exactly. Yeah. If you do move yourself away from that, because when we're at work, well, there's this low level stress response on most people that have this low level of, I need to perform. I've got this little amount of stress response going through my body. And if you're off work, if you're completely off work, you can move yourself out of that sort of stress response and into a real, state of calm and repair. And you're
Yeah,
likely to recover a lot faster. So I don't know, I guess in terms of workplaces, if you've got people who they're in and out, they're in the office sometimes and they're not in the office sometimes, but they're at home sick, if their sickness is prolonged because they're not recovering fast enough, eventually they'll bring it in to the office anyway. So, it is something that I think long term, yeah, for the not just for the workplace because they're getting a lower level of performance, but just someone who's turning up sick eventually is going to pass it on to someone else, or just have that prolonged illness, which
and I read a story exactly on that in the States. They had something contagious. Their manager demanded they came into work. They came
wow,
into work, kind of crawled out late in the afternoon, like, oh, death warmed up, decimated the whole department of like 20 people, and like
yeah,
15, 16 people were all on. And then it was just, then it became the manager now having to explain that, "Oh, well, I did it because we really needed them." And their boss was saying, "Yeah, look at the damage you've caused."
yeah,
And the person had said, "Hey, I think I've got this contagious thing from my kid." "No, I don't care. You need to come in." Um, and so I think there's a frightful reminder, but I think
mm,
we do need to get back some of those healthy habits. I mean, and I think we actually improved after COVID. So I think COVID had a positive effect because we realized, oh my gosh, what happens if I give my colleague COVID and they die of it, right? Now,
right,
I don't know what the numbers are like in Australia now, and I'll be honest, I don't even know what they're like in New Zealand.
yeah,
But every now and then, every 6 months, there seems to be an update that we've had so many cases. I don't even know when the last death was, but you know,
mm,
we don't want that on the conscious of our top performance, right? Oh, you maybe come into work, or I had to come into work and I picked it up off somebody else and I gave it to my parent or whatever. So,
Totally.
we're not dying for a paycheck. We just want to work and earn money and do something meaningful.
Yeah.
Um, and again, it comes back to my thing. Good employers will do this well. Good leaders will be helpful. But I think we need to, as a workforce, be more mindful of our own well-being and be our own support network, right? And just be kind of like, no, I can't do that. Oh, I need you to do that report. I'm going to have to work through the weekend. Yes. You don't pay me to work through the weekend. I do so much work, or maybe that's the thing for the productive people to remind the leaders who like rewarding them with more work. Say, hey, I give a lot to this place. You're not helping my well-being by loading me up. I don't even know if my child is a boy or a girl anymore because I've never seen them in weeks. You mean boss.
So it's about setting those boundaries and really being clear and saying this is what I can actually take on. And I think, like we said earlier, like high performers in particular are the ones that really struggle with setting those boundaries and saying no when it really is starting to feed into, their off work time, their family time. After dinner, just going to quickly pop off and do a little bit more work before bed and
So I do have a good suggestion on this one, and the term isn't mine. I read it and I went, oh my gosh, prioritize ruthlessly. And how
Mm.
I interpret it is Ruth's my boss. She says, Jarrod, we've got this urgent report. I need it by the end of the month. And I say to you, sure, boss, I know you're giving it to me because you want the best on it. Great. Cool. Thank you very much. Yeah. Now, on my list here of the 6 things I'm working on, who's now doing number 5 and 6? Because I
Mm.
can't add this big project on and do everything else I was doing. And when your boss goes, oh, can you not do it all? You say, nope. I just don't have the time. I think we need to remind them that, hey, if you're loading me with extra work, I'm not a robot. I need to rest. I need to recover. And unless you're paid humongously large and tons of money, I suspect you're extracting a bit of extra value for what you pay me. There is, so push back as much as you can. And I realize, every now and I spent a year once with a post-it note next to on my laptop lid that said, say no. I'll be honest and say I'm not sure how successful I was. I remember saying it a few times, sometimes thinking I was quite strong, and sometimes thinking, oh, I can't believe I didn't say yes to that. The world didn't come to an end. My boss didn't sack me because I was useless. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
but whatever the strategy might be, maybe it's saying no more, and there's always somebody in the workplace who is the expert at no. And when you look at their workload, you go, you're doing 2 things, and I'm doing 5, and now I've got this extra thing, and maybe it's telling your boss that, hey, number 6 could go to that guy because they're not doing much.
Mm.
Um, so I think that's the thing about just prioritizing your work. And when something new gets added, even if you think, oh, I could do that, you should be saying, hey, boss, if I pick up you know, number number 6, who's going to pick up my number 5? Because I want to swap one out. I've been working on it, but it needs a lot of time to finish. I
Yeah.
no longer have any time, rather than just go, yes, put another heavy pack on my back and let me just show you how strong I am. Because leaders love that until you collapse, and then they're like, "Oh my gosh, you've let me down because you haven't finished the projects, either one, or all
Like
6."
that. Yeah.
Yeah,
And so just as we sort of wrap up the interview, I was just curious, what about your well-being? How over the years how have you gone with your well-being? What have you had some highs and lows, and what kind of things do you do to protect yourself? You
yeah. So I
mentioned
go
a
to
few
the
things.
gym fairly regularly, 3 times a week.
Mhm.
Sometimes I'll squeeze in a fourth day. So typically I used to go Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Um, this year, I do a fortnightly TV slot, and it went from Tuesday, which worked out well, to a Wednesday, which stuffed things up. And now I've been doing like Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. I'm an early riser. I wake up, I have my coffee, I'll go to the gym for an hour. I really work on the rest periods in between. I treat myself almost every week. I get a a deep tissue massage, a Thai
Wow.
massage every week. When I tell it to people, they're like, "Why? Are you injured?" I'm like, "No, I work hard, I play hard. I've done martial arts for quite a few decades, so I spend quite a lot of time. I can calm my mind. I do a lot of Tai Chi, for example. I do a bit of stretching to keep things flowing. I've tried to get better on my diet as well for the last couple of years because these things are all related. And I think one of the things too is as you get older, you realize, yeah, you just can't, you can get away with so much when you're in your 20s. You cannot get away with so much when the 20s are a distant memory. And so, I try to eat healthy, be active, make social connections. I work from home quite a lot because I love to do my work and I can do heaps at home. So when I go to work, I spend all of my time coffeeing with colleagues, lunch with PhD students or coffee with PhD students, using my time as productively as possible. Social now, colleagues and PhD students, I'm typically working with everybody, so those are work-related activities, but we share, a coffee, we share lunch, we share social connections. I share academic stuff to like PhD students, but always trying to kind of, I guess, fill up your cup of social connections in this case, as well as vaguely good food, vaguely good coffee. Perhaps not as good as places I've been in Melbourne, for example. Slightly jealous there, but it's just being proactive and trying to be kind to yourself when you're doing things like prioritizing ruthlessly. You are thinking, and I've had times where I have this much work and I'm doing something and I'm like, I've just got to finish this, and it's kind of knocking, and then I'll finish it, and then I'll be like, one chunk, two, oh look, and before you know it, even though I knew I'd pushed it a week later than it was expected, I then got everything done, and just realizing that, yes, I know that works well for me. I don't try to multitask. There used to be that thing that women are so much better at
Oh
multitasking
yeah, yeah,
than men. Turns out that multitasking isn't actually that good.
really.
So you end up doing two or more things poorly than one thing very good. So I tend to do one thing now, and one thing with the modern workplaces is, email is an endless barrage of work to do. My profession's interesting because we get an endless barrage of free work to do. Review this, review
Yeah.
that. Your review is overdue. And I'm like, you don't pay me for it. I don't really care that it's overdue. And, I give myself permission to not care that it's 2 weeks late. And then I'll do them all. And then I'll be like, yes, now the pressure's off. And then I have to remind myself, next time somebody says, can you review this? I have to say, no, I can't because I'm going overseas and this is a pain, this is problematic for a couple of weeks. So trying to be kind to yourself, but I also keep a track of my I don't know if it's my work mood, but when I feel empty, I will literally do very little. But I'm also, I know I'm 100 miles an hour when the battery is full,
Yeah.
and I do more than enough. And at least I have a manager. I've had my last manager before that tell me, "Oh, you do so much." Yeah, and that's great great management, but it's also one thing to think, yeah, that's really great. Now put that in your out of the ego box because it really doesn't matter. That's just a useful validation around
Mm.
performance and productivity. And now manage Jarrod. And where am I at? I'm freaking exhausted. Yeah. Okay. How are we going to get around this? And I think then you can spend some brain power on yourself because I think that will help you achieve. I mean, and I've done research. I got evidence. A healthy body,
Yeah.
happy worker is a productive worker. So don't forget to focus on your well-being because it'll make you more productive. And as a leader, we should be looking for and encouraging, more productivity via well-being, not cracking the whip, but saying, "Hey, you're doing a great job. Hey, let's do some training for the next couple of days." Oh, why? Because you guys haven't done any for 6 months, and I want to reward all the hard work you've been doing. Oh, cool. Okay. Because that'll bring my batteries back up, and when we need it, I'm ready to rock. So,
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. It has been so good to hear about all of this that you've been telling us about the work that you're doing, the research, some of the statistics that, I'm gonna go away and have a real think about because there's a lot to take on, and I'd love to actually see some of the articles that you've already
oh yeah, yeah,
published.
yeah.
That'd be great. We can pop a few into the whatever you show notes or whatever they are.
Sure, sure, sure. Better send
Um,
those through.
yeah, that'd be great. And how can people contact you if they'd like to reach out,
Oh,
say hello, ask questions?
I'm very happy for you to pass on my email address.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I was going to say I'll type it into the chat, but it's only you've got
Yeah,
my email address. So very happy when you send this link out and says if any related questions.
definitely.
I have to be honest. Do I think there's a big difference between Australia and New Zealand? 25% of income, maybe, but not on really much else.
Yeah.
Um, do we have a lot of attention to psychosocial risk factors? Yeah, we're following your lead somewhat. Burnout will be definitely one of those things that occurs when you don't manage those risks well. I don't know what the rates are in Australia, but I suspect they're not going to be a lot radically different anyway.
Probably
And I
not.
do think we've all suffered from COVID, which has changed that baseline. And that's
Exactly.
kind of where I'm slightly annoyed for the workforce that, at 20%, I was thinking like, should we not be hovering on like 11%? And maybe I'm thinking, oh, will this be the time we crack, single digits? It's been a long time. Actually, it's been never since I've dreamed of single digits because it hasn't occurred yet. So I'm just kind of like, hi caramba. Let's just hope that happens
Yeah.
soon anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. No, well, here's hoping, and the research that you're doing is just awesome. So I just want to say thank you for, coming on today, giving me your time, sharing your wisdom, some really interesting takeaways, I think, for people to think about. So yeah, thank you.
My pleasure, Ruth. Thanks very much. See yous.
If today's episode sparks something for you, choose one small action and try it this week. Wellbeing doesn't need to be big to be effective. Don't forget to leave a rating and review, share this episode with a friend, or reach out to me on LinkedIn and let me know what you think. Thanks for spending this time with me and have an amazing day.